Welcome to the weekly DeSmogCAST, where we clear the PR pollution that clouds climate science and shed some light on the biggest environmental news stories of the week. I'm Farron Cousins, DeSmog blog contributor. Joining me this week, as always, we have Carol Linnitt, the managing editor and director of research for DeSmog Canada, Brendan DeMelle, the executive director and managing editor of DeSmogBlog.com, and investigative journalist and DeSmog research fellow Steve Horn. Everybody, thanks for joining me this week. Brendan, let's go ahead and just kick things off right off the bat. We've had a very big week in Washington, D.C. with both some positives and negatives in the realm of climate change. Lay it out for us. What's happened?
Sure. Well, I think the most important development this week, of course, is the U.S.-China deal. A historic agreement between the countries to finally, accept responsibility as the two largest polluters on the planet to rein in carbon emissions. So we see China committing to peak their emissions by 2030, and then the U.S. agreeing to cut by 25% their emissions, or 26% by 2025. So, firm commitments. This is good. This is the direction we need to go. It sends a strong signal heading into the Paris negotiations next year that we need an international agreement on this global problem, and that the biggest economies are ready to act. So, in that sense, it's a good signal. That said, it comes with a side of caution from climate scientists who are quick to point out that it's not enough in terms of action to keep us below 2 degrees of warming in Celsius. So we need to see a lot more, but again, you got to take good news when you can get it. So this is an historic agreement, and it also elevates this, several issues that we see in Washington. Farron, you wrote about the Republicans' intent to continue their attacks on the Environmental Protection Agency, and certainly when we see the GOP-led Congress take over in January, we'll see those attacks ramp up. So certainly expect more on the negative front there, with this do-nothing Congress, turning into a do-nothinger GOP-led Congress, which will certainly be trying to drown the EPA in the bathtub and block any action on climate change, which leads to another thing going on right now this week with the Congress, the Republicans playing football with their new midterm victories, trying to push a vote on the Keystone XL tar sands export pipeline. Again, just grandstanding. This is mostly bluster because this is President Obama and John Kerry's decision. They need to make it. It will define the president's climate legacy. And this U.S.-China deal also, is good reason for him to say no to this tar sands pipeline. That is, a climate disaster that threatens our water supplies and people and farmers and throughout our country. So he needs to say no. He now has extra reason to do so, and the Congress, as much as they might try, are pretty limited in what they can do in blocking that.
And Steve, Brennan brought up some really good points there, and that kind of moves us into the next area of discussion. We've had a do-nothing Congress for 2 years, but the do-nothing is almost favorable to the do-something, because that something that they're trying to do is get this Keystone XL pipeline passed. Give us the 10,000 foot of what is happening with Keystone in the U.S. right now.
A quick DeSmogCAST update here. Today, the United States House of Representatives passed a bill to approve of the Keystone XL pipeline, and on Tuesday, the United States Senate will vote on the same bill, sponsored by Senator Mary Landrieu. It's still unclear whether or not President Barack Obama will veto that bill if it gets to his desk. So we're going to see a vote by early next week on Tuesday in the Senate. We're going to see a vote in the House tomorrow on Friday. So that's happening at the same time as a major lawsuit was filed this week against a key pipeline owned by Enbridge. Long story short is that there are two pipelines that Enbridge maneuvered their way into creating that will basically usurp the normal process that Enbridge would have to go through the State Department, adding pressure pumps on each side of the border. So environmental groups filed a lawsuit, including the Sierra Club, Center for Biological Diversity, etc. And that pipeline would do the very same thing as the Keystone XL pipeline, and that is ship tar sands all the way through the United States down to the Gulf Coast and off to the export market. And we already see the example of that with the Enbridge pipeline. Enbridge has a subsidiary in which they have already started exporting tar sands to Europe. So it's not just some hypothetical argument that we think this is an export pipeline. This is an export pipeline, and another company that's sending its oil through Enbridge's system called MEG Energy, they're also considering exporting tar sands, and they said that in their Q3 investor call. So the reality is becoming more and more clear each day. These two pipelines, Enbridge's system that goes through the United States and the TransCanada system, both of those are by and large export pipelines, maybe not exclusively, but that will be one of the key functions.
And that, down here along the Gulf Coast, obviously this is where they want the pipelines to end. This is, not exactly the place where you want that, considering we're still reeling from the effects of the BP oil spill. But I want to go ahead and move along. Carol, up there in Canada, you have a union of scientists that have decided enough is enough. We're not inherently political, but we have to get political in order to convince Canadian government that climate change is real, that it requires action, and that we have to do something right away. Tell us what's happening up there with the Union of Scientists.
So this is the Canadian Professional Institute of Public Service Canada, and they just had their AGU, and they actually voted on campaigning against the Harper government in the lead up to this election. So Canada is moving into a federal election sometime in the next year. Could be as early as the spring or as late as the fall. And in the run-up to that, this group actually represents 55,000 public sector employees. So it's a huge union, and their president was saying, that the leadership of this current federal government has been extremely damaging, not only to the public sector but to Canadian democracy. And for that reason, the employees of this union have voted to bring these issues to light during the campaign in order to campaign against the Conservative government. It's a totally unprecedented move. This is a non-partisan, non-political organization, but as Debbie Davio, the president, said, extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And so they have committed to three things. One is to prepare for job action, to energetically, they say, expose what the Harper government has done since it's come to power, and also to promote unions and to bring the Canadian public into a more knowledgeable role in fighting for public services in Canada. So pretty interesting. It's kind of the next segment in what in Canada we're calling the war on science. We've seen millions of dollars cut and the elimination of literally thousands and thousands of research and science jobs for our federal researchers, and at the same time as really harsh measures have been introduced to prevent scientists from speaking with the media or members of the public. So you can understand why these normally very placid Canadian scientists are a little hot under the collar. So definitely going to be interesting changes moving into the next federal election.
And like you said, these are people who are typically nonpartisan, non-political, and that is exactly what the entire, environmental movement should be, because it's not a partisan issue, it's not a political issue, it affects every single one of us, and it's been co-opted by politicians on both sides and all over the country, all over the world actually. So unfortunately, until we get it out of the hands of politicians, I kind of see it just kind of dragging its feet. But anyway, everyone, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Carol Linnitt, Brendan DeMelle, Steve Horn. Thank you for joining us. All the stories that we talked about today can be found online, DeSmogBlog.com, DeSmog.ca, and DeSmog.uk. And don't forget, subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/DeSmogBlog. And we will see you here next week.